Within the different story manga, we get to see both Mami and Kyoko meeting for the first time and forming a partnership shortly after, but at some point, things begin to fall apart and Kyoko ends up betraying Mami due to her conflicting circumstances with her family. Now, in order to come up with a scenario in which Kyoko stays with Mami, we need to understand why she left in the first place. After Kyoko's father discovers Kyoko's secret of being a magical girl, he proceeded to eventually go crazy in depression and anger over what had happened, which resulted in him killing off his family with the exception of Kyoko. Now, after this happened, Kyoko, as we know, was devastated. She felt like she was the reason that her family was torn apart. She loses her initial abilities that she gained through her wish as expressed from Kyubey, and she had lost the will to go on. And that is until Mami had appeared in front of her and proceeded to help her as best as she could as her senpai. And we know within a different story manga that Kyoko expressed that had Mami not been there for her at that time, Kyoko probably would have fallen into despair and she probably would have become a witch, and that would have been the end of it. We know that Kyoko is at a crossroad at this point in her life. She decided that, you know what? I made this wish and I got these powers for myself. They're for me and they're not for anyone else. And I feel like Kyoko had to come to this conclusion in order to move on, because had she not reached this conclusion that her powers were for her, then she would have continued to blame herself for what had inevitably happened to her family. However, because of the fact that Kyoko had decided to approach her entire life from this perspective, this conflicted with Mami and the way that she approached life. Because Mami dedicated her entire life to helping and protecting people. And obviously, before all that devastation happened with Kyoko's family, Kyoko felt exactly the same way. She had become a magical girl to help her father, and she and Mami had the same type of ideals. But because of what had taken place, and in order for Kyoko to move on, she had to reach this conclusion that says, you know what? From now on, I'm only gonna fight for myself. So obviously this resulted in a conflict between Mami and Kyoko, and eventually the two ended up splitting up. And Mami was devastated because she didn't understand completely why Kyoko had changed. And Mami had always been a person who had suffered being alone for such a long time, and she really felt such a connection with Kyoko, and so it devastated her that things turned out this way. Now, the topic of this video is what would have happened had things changed. Now, what if Kyoko had never left Mami? Now, imagine what would have happened if the version of Kyoko that we saw after she lost her parents that Mami found within the snow was the version that remained. Because had Kyoko not changed, that version that we saw is the version that would have remained within the series. This version of Kyoko was depressed, she was a lot less focused, and she was a lot less feisty. Obviously, she would have continued to stay with Mami, so obviously they would have continued to fight witches. And we know that not long after Mami found Kyoko in the snow, Mami commented on the fact that Kyoko was not fighting at the same level that she was before. And we know from reading a different story that the reason that this was the case was because on one hand, Kyoko was still feeling conflicted about her family, and she also had lost her magical abilities, so she couldn't fight at the same level that she did before. So obviously, she would have continued to get injured, she would have continued to struggle, and she would have continued to feel conflicted within herself because of everything that had happened with her parents. I guess you can kind of say it's very similar to Sayaka. Like when you consider all the confliction that Sayaka felt within both the different story manga and the series, Kyoko would have basically followed a very similar path to Sayaka. She probably would have also felt bad that she was holding Mami back. Mami would have felt very concerned because she wouldn't know at this point that Kyoko had lost her magical ability, and she wouldn't understand in detail what was going on with Kyoko. And we know that Kyoko is not the type to be completely honest with her feelings, so I think it's inevitable that eventually Mami and Kyoko would have come across a witch which would have attempted to kill a conflicted and depressed and distracted Kyoko, and Mommy probably would have jumped in front of Kyoko in order to protect her from being injured, very similar to what Mommy does in the different story for Sayaka. The same thing would have happened in regards to Kyoko. So Mommy would have taken a very serious injury at the hands of a witch in her attempts to try to protect a weaker and more conflicted Kyoko. Now, Kyoko obviously would have felt devastated had this occurred. She would have blamed herself even more, and she probably would have felt, every person that I connect myself with gets injured or hurt because of me. I'm no good. I'm a terrible person. My family is dead because of me. And now, the only person that I have left, my senpai, who I secretly view as a sister, has now been injured and could potentially die all because of me. After this occurs, I feel that Kyoko would try to come up with some type of way of protecting Mommy, or at least finding a way to escape the witch that they're fighting in order to, maybe get Mommy to safety, like a safe location, in order to try to help her recover from her injuries that she sustained during the confrontation with the witch. Now, Kyoko doesn't have healing abilities, unlike Sayaka, who did in a different story, because as you can probably, if you read the different story, then you know that a lot of what I'm saying kind of parallels with what happened with Mami and Sayaka. I feel that this is probably how things would have turned out. So Kyoko would have did her very best to help Mami recover her injuries, while she's attempting to help Mami as best as she can. I imagine that Kyoko would feel responsible for what had happened to Mami, and I'm sure that at this point she would make a vow to herself that says, once Mami recovers, I'm going to leave her, because as long as I stay with her, something could potentially happen where she's going to die, because every time I get myself connected with somebody, that's what inevitably happens. Maybe while Mami is recovering and maybe she's not 100%, let's say that Kyoko basically is out there trying to find some food for Mami, or trying to get her something to help her, recover even more. Now, we know in the series that witches have a tendency to target people that have negative emotions. So because of the fact that Kyoko is feeling conflicted, that would make her a really big target for a witch. Imagine a witch attempting to target her while she's by herself, trying to continue to help Mami recover fully from an injury, and Kyoko is fighting this witch and trying her best to defeat it, and she inevitably fails. And while this is happening, part of her feels really happy that she's about to die, because from her perspective, every person that I come in contact with suffers, so me dying would probably be a good thing. So let's just say that she resigns herself to this fate. And then we have Mami-san appear, because we know that Mami-san is very good at detecting witches, so it makes sense why Mami, even if she was still somewhat injured, would attempt to try to help Kyoko. So imagine if a half-injured Mami came to Kyoko's aid in an attempt to try to protect her Kokai from this witch that has targeted her, and in the process, Mami is on the verge of once again dying in order to try to help Kyoko. And imagine Kyoko screaming at Mami saying, "No, you shouldn't help me, please don't." And then Mami basically expresses to her, "You're my Kokai, I care for you," kind of thing. And she probably would say something along the lines of, "I know what it's like to be alone, and I don't want you to shoulder the burden of what happened." Now, I feel like both Mami and Kyoko would have some type of moment while Mami's trying to protect her and while she's about to die. And I feel like Mami would probably go down from the witch that they're both trying to fight. And I think this would probably be where things would change, because Kyoko would reach a conclusion at this point where she would realize, I lost my family, and the only person that I have left is, Mami, who I really view as being a sister, because we know that at the end of different story, Kyoko reveals that she saw Mami as a sister. So at this point, because of the fact that Mami is on the verge of death, I feel that Kyoko would reach a conclusion where, I can't. It is true that I lost my family, but I don't want to lose anyone else. I feel like Kyoko would reach this resolve within herself to do everything that she could to protect her sister, who she feels is Mami. So it's at this point that I feel Kyoko's determination would come into play. And the reason why I feel like, because the thing about Kyoko is, despite the fact that this version of Kyoko wouldn't be as feisty or as energetic as the version that we saw in the anime, because this version of Kyoko has not reached this conclusion of only fighting for herself. But I feel like Kyoko still has feistiness. I feel like Kyoko has a lot of strength within her. And the reason I say this is because she's a character who was born in poverty. Like, when you think about her circumstances when she was with her family, from the very beginning she was poor, and she already had some type of experience when it came to stealing food. So what that really says about her was the fact that she had the resolve to survive within her. So she had strength, despite the fact that this was before she lost her family. She was raised under harsh circumstances. So I feel like at some point, more specifically at this point, I feel like that strong inner self of her, that really strong inner self, would kick in, and she would do everything she can to not only survive for her own sake, but to help the one person who she had left, which was her sister. So I feel that Kyoko would, find the strength within her to defeat the witch that both Mami and Kyoko are fighting. At this point, Kyoko would probably defeat the witch on her own. She would feel really bad about what happened with Mami, and I feel like because of this is when Kyoko would admit to Mami, something, you've always been a sister to me. I care for you so much. And I feel like both Mami and Kyoko would have a heart-to-heart moment, because this would be really big for Mami too, because at this point in the series, it wouldn't have been established that these two had a relationship that was beyond senpai and kokai, like beyond student and mentor. So Kyoko, after coming to this conclusion, would express this to Mami, and but Mami would probably get teary-eyed, and both she and Kyoko would have a heart-to-heart with each other. And I believe that this heart-to-heart would lead to Mami eventually understanding that Kyoko had lost her abilities, her illusion abilities, because of the fact that she subconsciously resented her wish. And what would have happened is Mami would have tried to devise of a strategy in which both she and Kyoko could work together to make up for the fact that Kyoko no longer had magic. And the reason that I say this is because it was revealed in a different story toward the end that, had Kyoko had said something to Mami about losing her ability, that she would have tried to devise a way for them to work together. She talked about how it was important for magical girls in a group to cover one another and make up for whatever one of the teammates lacks. So Mami has this kind of mentality within her. So after discovering from Kyoko that she no longer had her abilities, Mami would go out of her way to try to devise of a way that the two could work together in order to make up for Kyoko's lost power. So I personally think that what would have resulted from this is that both Kyoko and Mami would have had much better teamwork, because for one thing, Mami would have worked on it, and because of the fact that the two of them have had this heart-to-heart, because of the fact that Kyoko resolved to protect her sister, and because of the fact that Mami understands that Kyoko sees her as more than just a mentor, their teamwork and their relationship would inevitably become stronger as a result. Now, if we fast forward to the events of the original Madoka Magica anime, obviously if Mami and Kyoko had never left each other, when it came time to meet with Sayaka and Madoka, Kyoko would have inevitably been by Mami's side, so the four of them would have met at around this time frame, which would have resulted in two things happening. First off, Mami most likely would not have died in episode 3 to Charlotte, because she would have had Kyoko as a partner by her side. They would have had a stronger fighting duo within them, and they both would have taken on Charlotte at this time. So with both Mami and Kyoko fighting side by side to take out Charlotte, Mami would have survived what had happened in episode 3. Now, if this had taken place, we know that the next thing that would have happened is Sayaka would have become a magical girl. And because of the fact that Kyoko hadn't experienced everything that she experienced, there wouldn't have been any conflict between Kyoko and Sayaka. And in fact, they probably would have been friends, I would imagine. And at this point, Sayaka's a magical girl, Mami's a magical girl, Kyoko's a magical girl. I feel like Madoka would not have made a wish at this point because there wouldn't have been a reason for her to do so. And I think that after Sayaka becomes a magical girl, it's inevitable that the next thing that would have happened is Homura would have made an attempt to approach Mami, Kyoko, and Sayaka and explain to them about Walpurgis Knot, and probably the four of them would have worked together in order to defeat Walpurgis Knot as Madoka watches from the sidelines. Now, whether or not they would have been able to defeat Walpurgis Knot is up for debate. I'm actually gonna let you guys tell me whether or not you think that if all of them had worked together, like just imagine a scenario in which we have a stronger Mami and a stronger Kyoko as it related to their teamwork and feelings for each other. And imagine if you add Sayaka into the mix, who we know looks up to Mami and probably would be really close friends with Kyoko. Imagine this version of the three of them working together alongside Homura. Imagine if these four worked together to try to defeat Walpurgis Knot. Do you guys think that they would stand a better chance? And if so, why? And if you don't think that they would, then explain why as well. So yeah, that's basically it for this video. Let me know what you guys think of this little what if scenario of what would have happened had Kyoko stayed with Mami. And I'll catch you later. This is Mami Sexual signing out. Peace.